POW camps were hellish and inhumane, employing all manner of torture. Malnutrition, solitary confinement, beatings, you name it.
Deep in the thick, steamy jungles of Vietnam, where the air was so hot and heavy it felt like it could crush you, danger lurked in ways American soldiers had never seen before. During the 1960s and 1970s, the Vietcong and North Vietnamese army turned the jungle into a giant living weapon. They crafted devious and deadly traps designed not just to mortally wound, but to break a soldier's spirit. These weren't ordinary weapons. They were part of a psychological battle meant to make every step feel like a gamble with death. In this treacherous maze of greenery, survival wasn't just about skill. It was about luck, vigilance, and sheer willpower. The Shadow Army of Vietnam. At the heart of the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong emerged as a force that truly changed the way wars were fought. Officially known as the National Front for the Liberation of South Vietnam, the Viet Cong was born in the 1950s in direct response to growing U.S. involvement in the region. Their primary aim was straightforward yet powerful: to overthrow the pro-American government in South Vietnam and reunify the country under communist rule. This mission was closely tied to the domino theory, the idea that if one nation fell to communism, its neighbors might soon follow, a concern that shaped U.S. policy in Southeast Asia. One of the most interesting aspects of the Viet Cong was the diverse mix of people who made up their ranks. They weren't only trained soldiers, but also peasants, urban workers, and former military men, along with countless ordinary citizens who believed in their cause. This blend of backgrounds created a strong local support network, making it easier to recruit new members and gather supplies and information. It was like having an entire community behind them, all working together toward a common goal. Inspired by the ancient teachings of Sun Tzu, especially his ideas on guerrilla warfare, the Viet Cong quickly realized that they could not match the U.S. military head-on. The Americans had superior technology, powerful airstrikes, and overwhelming numbers. Instead of meeting force with force, the Viet Cong adopted a strategy of attrition. They focused on surprise ambushes, acts of sabotage, and quick, unpredictable attacks that gradually wore down their enemy. This method was all about avoiding open, conventional battles, and instead using the element of surprise to keep the U.S. forces off balance. The Viet Cong's deep understanding of the local terrain was vital to their tactics. They knew every twist and turn of the jungle, every hidden path, and even the secret tunnel systems that allowed them to move without being seen. These tunnels, some of which were later famously known as the Cu Chi tunnels, provided safe passage and storage for supplies, and they helped the fighters stay hidden during intense search operations. The rugged landscape, which often seemed to work against the American troops, became a valuable ally for the Viet Cong. In addition to their expertise in using the land, the Viet Cong built efficient intelligence networks. They gathered detailed information from local villagers, which allowed them to predict American moves and plan counterattacks accordingly. This decentralized network meant that even if one part of the organization was compromised, the rest could continue operating smoothly. Small, independent cells made it very difficult for the U.S. forces to locate and destroy their entire operation. Strong leadership was another key element of the Viet Cong's success. Leaders like Vo Nguyen Giap were not only brilliant military strategists, but also charismatic figures who understood the importance of morale. They knew that winning a war wasn't just about weapons and technology, it was also about inspiring people to keep fighting, even under tough conditions. Their leadership helped maintain unity and adaptability, enabling the Viet Cong to continually adjust their tactics in response to the evolving battlefield. Cu Chi tunnels, Vietnam's hidden war zone. During the Vietnam War, the Cu Chi tunnels symbolized resilience and resourcefulness. This vast underground network, stretching over 250 kilometers, was not just a series of hidden passages, it was the lifeline of the Vietcong's guerrilla warfare. Built from the 1940s through the 1960s, these tunnels connected strategic spots from the outskirts of Saigon to the Cambodian border, serving as secret bases for combat operations, storage depots for supplies, and safe havens where fighters could hide and regroup. The creation of these tunnels is a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the Viet Cong. With just basic tools and sheer willpower, local fighters dug these passageways by hand under extremely harsh conditions. They had to work in sweltering heat and oppressive humidity while battling the risk of tunnel collapses. The entrances were cleverly camouflaged under mounds of earth or hidden deep within dense vegetation, making it incredibly difficult for U.S. and South Vietnamese forces to locate them. In many ways, these tunnels were like nature's own secret passageways, perfectly designed to keep the guerrillas hidden from their more technologically advanced enemy. Life in the Cu Chi tunnels was anything but easy. Imagine living in narrow, dark passageways with almost no ventilation, where the air was thick and often hard to breathe. Despite these hardships, the tunnels were more than just escape routes. The Viet Cong transformed these underground corridors into fully functioning living quarters. Makeshift bedrooms, basic kitchens, meeting rooms, and even small underground hospitals were carved out of the confined spaces. These additions meant that fighters could rest, eat, plan, and even recover from injuries without ever having to risk exposure to enemy fire above ground. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Cu Chi tunnels was their complexity and versatility. They weren't merely hiding spots, they served as true operational hubs. In these secret underground corridors, guerrillas could plan their next moves, coordinate surprise attacks, and store weapons and supplies without fear of detection. This constant underground presence allowed them to launch hit-and-run attacks, retreat quickly, and then reappear in another location, all without letting the enemy know where they were. The tunnels were the perfect tool to counterbalance the U.S. military's technological and numerical superiority. What made the tunnel system even more impressive was its ability to adapt. Even with advanced reconnaissance and search technologies, U.S. forces found it nearly impossible to completely root out the tunnel network. Whenever parts of the system were discovered or destroyed, the Viet Cong would quickly rebuild and extend them, always staying a step ahead. This resilience and ability to recover allowed the tunnels to play a key role in keeping the insurgency alive throughout the conflict. The strategic importance of the tunnels went beyond just military operations. They provided a secure environment where the guerrillas could recover from injuries, resupply, and reorganize without the constant threat of air or ground attacks. By hiding underground, the Viet Cong managed to avoid many direct confrontations, instead opting for a war of attrition that slowly wore down their enemies. Their deep knowledge of the terrain and the ingenious design of the tunnels made it nearly impossible for U.S. forces to completely eliminate this underground network. Deadly landmines. During the war, the Viet Cong turned the use of landmines into an art form. These hidden, explosive devices became a key part of their guerrilla tactics, helping them level the playing field against better-equipped enemies. Unlike a simple barrier, the mines were part of a well-thought-out plan to slow down enemy movements and force them into traps. The Viet Cong planted mines in places where enemy troops were most likely to pass. They chose spots like assembly areas, trails, hedgerows, tree lines, and even fence lines and gates. By placing mines along these routes, they disrupted the enemy's advance and created deadly kill zones. Instead of trying to block movement completely, the mines worked to channel the enemy into narrow paths where ambushes were waiting. One remarkable aspect of the Viet Cong's mine warfare was their discipline and careful planning. They were always on the lookout, keeping their minefields under constant surveillance. As soon as an enemy patrol moved through a cleared area, the Viet Cong would quickly move in and replant mines, ensuring that no gap stayed open for long. They even marked their own mines with secret signals that only their troops and trusted local villagers knew about. This clever system helped them avoid accidental casualties among their own people while keeping the enemy guessing. The Viet Cong did not rely solely on one type of mine. They used a mix of devices to suit different situations. One common type was the command-detonated directional mine. For instance, when they captured U.S. Claymore mines, the Viet Cong repurposed them for their own use. They also employed the Chinese-made DH-10 directional mine, often called the Chi-Com Claymore. These mines were set up on trees or along jungle trails, so that when enemy soldiers came by, the mines could be triggered remotely to send shrapnel in a deadly arc. But it wasn't just high-tech mines that the Viet Cong used. When supplies were scarce, they became experts at improvisation. They turned everyday items into lethal weapons. Unexploded ordnance like hand grenades, mortar shells, and artillery rounds were repurposed. Even oil drums, ammunition cans, beer and soda cans, and bicycle frames were transformed into makeshift mines. Simple triggering devices, a pressure plate, a tripwire, or even a battery-powered mechanism were attached to these improvised devices. This resourcefulness meant that the Viet Cong could keep constant pressure on enemy forces without needing a steady supply of manufactured mines. Another smart tactic was the use of command-detonated mines. These allowed the Viet Cong to wait until enemy soldiers were in a perfect position before triggering the explosion. This remote control gave them the power to maximize damage and create chaos, often catching enemy units completely off guard. Punji traps. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong showed an extraordinary ability to use even the simplest resources as deadly weapons. One of the most infamous examples of this ingenuity was the Punji pit trap. These traps, though simple in design, left a powerful impact on the battlefield and on the minds of soldiers. At its core, a Punji pit was a concealed pit dug into the ground, lined with sharpened bamboo stakes. The stakes were often treated with unsavory substances such as feces or decaying material. While this might sound purely gruesome, it had a harsh, calculated purpose. When a soldier fell into a Punji pit, the injuries went far beyond the immediate puncture wounds. The contamination of the stakes greatly increased the risk of infections like tetanus or even more severe conditions like gangrene. Without proper medical care, these infections could turn minor injuries into life-threatening ones, often sidelining a soldier for weeks or months, or in the worst cases, leading to death. The design of the Punji pit was deceptively simple. The pits were camouflaged with natural debris, grass, leaves, and other jungle materials that allowed them to blend perfectly into the environment. This made the traps nearly impossible to spot until it was too late. Imagine trekking through dense jungle foliage, where every step could potentially hide a deadly trap waiting to be triggered. The constant uncertainty made every movement perilous, adding a heavy psychological weight to each patrol. For Viet Cong fighters, Punji pits were not used in isolation. They were part of a broader strategy of guerrilla warfare that aimed to disrupt enemy movements and sow terror among the ranks. Instead of relying solely on direct confrontations with heavily armed opponents, the Viet Cong turned the very ground into a weapon. They placed these traps in strategic locations, near likely assembly areas, along jungle trails, around ambush sites, and even near fortifications. The idea was to slow down the enemy, force them to move in predictable patterns, and expose them to other dangers like ambushes or sniper fire. The psychological impact of these traps was just as significant as their physical effects. Knowing that the ground itself could be a lethal threat created an atmosphere of constant dread. Soldiers were always on edge, wondering if the next step might be their last. This fear was not unfounded. Even a seemingly minor injury from a bamboo stake could escalate into a serious infection, leaving soldiers in pain and away from combat for long periods. In many cases, this not only weakened the overall fighting force, but also sapped the morale of the troops. The knowledge that the enemy had managed to weaponize the very earth beneath their feet was a stark reminder that technological superiority alone was not enough to win in such a challenging environment. U.S. forces attempted to counter this menace by using mine detectors and probing the ground carefully with various tools. However, the simplicity of the Punji pit, combined with the Vietcong's intimate knowledge of the jungle, made complete prevention nearly impossible. The traps were set up quickly and often relocated, ensuring that even if one pit was discovered, many others lay in wait. This tactic, as cruel as it was effective, left an indelible mark on the history of guerrilla warfare and serves as a reminder of the extreme measures taken during one of the most challenging conflicts of the 20th century. Deadly snake traps. Deep in the tangled jungles of Vietnam, the danger was never far away. While soldiers faced the constant threat of ambushes and hidden traps, they also had to be wary of a more silent enemy, venomous snakes. According to the U.S. National Archives, between 25 and 50 American soldiers were bitten by snakes each year during the Vietnam War. Though not every snake in the jungle was dangerous, two species stood out, and you really didn't want to mess with them. One of the most infamous was the yellow-bellied bamboo pit viper. American troops quickly dubbed it the two-stepper, a nickname that hinted at its lethal bite. While the name might suggest a quick two-step dance to your doom, the truth was far more chilling. The venom of this viper was deadly, capable of taking a life if not treated quickly. With its natural camouflage blending in with bamboo and leaves, the snake was a hidden threat on every patrol. But the danger didn't stop there. In one of the more shocking twists of the war, the Vietcong took a page from nature's playbook and used these vipers as biological weapons. They would hang the snakes from tunnel ceilings, rigging a trap that would drop the viper onto an unsuspecting soldier's head. Imagine entering a dark tunnel, on the lookout for hidden explosives or enemy fighters, only to be met by a venomous snake descending right from above. It was a tactic that mixed terror with surprise, making every tunnel a potential death trap. The other serpent that roamed these dense forests was the king cobra. Known as one of the largest venomous snakes in the world, king cobras can grow up to 4 meters long. Their impressive size was matched by their dangerous reputation. Soldiers encountered these snakes not only in the wild jungle, but also in rice paddies, near outhouses, and even curled up on the seats of helicopters. The sight of a king cobra, coiled and alert, was enough to send a shiver down anyone's spine. The jungles of Vietnam were a world where nature's beauty intertwined with its brutal realities. Venomous snakes like the yellow-bellied bamboo pit viper and the king cobra added to the many hazards that soldiers faced. Their presence was a constant reminder that in a place where every shadow could hide danger, even nature seemed to be part of the conflict. Net and pit traps. Deep in the heart of the Vietnamese jungle, the Vietcong mastered the art of deadly ingenuity. Their use of net and pit traps became a symbol of how simple materials, when combined with clever design and deep knowledge of the terrain, could bring a powerful edge to guerrilla warfare. These traps weren't high-tech or flashy. They were straightforward and easy to set up, and yet they packed a serious punch, both physically and psychologically. Take the net trap, often called a man-catcher. Picture a large, camouflaged net spread out on the jungle floor, hidden under a blanket of leaves and branches, and secured with carefully placed stakes. The trap was set so that when an unsuspecting soldier stepped right on it, a hidden rope would suddenly tighten, hoisting the victim off the ground. This sudden lift not only exposed the soldier to further danger, but also created an overwhelming sense of helplessness. It was as if the very ground conspired against them, turning each step into a potential death trap. A memorable incident that brought this terror to life occurred in 1966 during Operation Attleboro in Thanh Province. U.S. Michael O'Brien Baker recalled the shock of the moment. Suddenly, I found myself lifted into the air, hanging from a tree, not knowing what had happened. Though his squad managed to free him quickly, the experience left a deep psychological scar. The fear of falling into such a trap lingered long after the physical wounds had healed, serving as a constant reminder of the enemy's cunning. But the Vietcong didn't stop at net traps. They also deployed pit traps, simple yet devastating devices designed to make soldiers fall into hidden, concealed holes. These pits were expertly camouflaged with natural materials like grass, leaves, or branches, making them nearly invisible to anyone moving through the dense jungle. Positioned in high-traffic areas, these traps turned routine patrols into nerve-wracking missions, where every step could lead to disaster. When a soldier fell into one of these pits, the immediate danger was obvious, but the long-term effects were just as severe. Injuries from the fall could be debilitating, leaving soldiers vulnerable and out of commission for extended periods. Both net and pit traps served multiple purposes. They directly incapacitated enemy soldiers, often forcing them out of the fight with injuries that were hard to treat in the harsh jungle environment. Moreover, they created an atmosphere of constant uncertainty. The knowledge that every step might trigger a trap added a heavy psychological burden, slowing down movements and disrupting the enemy's operations. U.S. troops had to tread carefully, always on guard, which in turn affected their ability to advance quickly and maintain momentum. Cartridge trap. When you think of guerrilla warfare in Vietnam, one of the most chilling images is that of a cartridge trap. This simple yet terrifying device was a favorite of the Vietcong, and it's not hard to see why. Imagine you're making your way through dense jungle terrain, your guard up for any enemy movement, and then, out of nowhere, a hidden trap goes off, all because of one misplaced step. The cartridge trap was as ingenious as it was crude. The setup was remarkably simple. A round of ammunition was wedged into a piece of bamboo and lowered into a shallow hole in the ground. Underneath the bamboo, a small board and a nail were carefully placed. The idea was that when an unsuspecting soldier stepped on the trap, the weight of their foot would force the cartridge down onto the nail. In that split second, the nail would act like a firing pin, striking the cartridge's primer and discharging the bullet upward. This might sound like something out of a horror movie, but it was a real tactic used in the thick jungles of Vietnam. With just a single bullet, a nail, and some bamboo, the Vietcong turned the very ground into a deadly weapon. There was no complex wiring or elaborate explosives, just simple materials that were easy to come by and even easier to set up. This made the cartridge trap incredibly cheap, quick to deploy, and almost impossible to detect. For an enemy soldier, the trap was a constant, hidden threat that could turn a routine patrol into a nightmare in an instant. Now imagine the impact of such a trap. The bullet, fired in an instant when a U.S. soldier stepped on it, would likely shoot upward through the victim's foot. In some cases, if the angle was right, it might even go further, maybe through the top of the foot and into the leg or face. The injuries could be severe enough to take a soldier out of action for weeks or even permanently. And it wasn't just the physical harm. The psychological terror of knowing that the ground itself could betray you was immense. Soldiers had to be extra cautious with every step, which slowed down movements and increased the overall sense of dread. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Sergeant James had always believed in the strength of his comrades, but nothing could have prepared him for what awaited in the dense Vietnamese jungle. Captured during a routine patrol, he was dragged deep into enemy territory by ruthless Vietcong fighters. Over several grueling days, they subjected him to unspeakable torment. In a cruel, calculated act, they blinded him by dousing his eyes with searing chemicals and forcing him to endure endless agony. His anguished cries echoed in the humid night as he lay helpless on the cold ground. One fellow prisoner whispered, "The unspeakable things the Vietcong did to U.S. soldiers," a phrase that would forever haunt his shattered spirit. Amid the excruciating pain and despair, a stubborn spark of hope remained. Even in utter darkness, James vowed to survive, clinging to memories of fallen brothers and the promise of someday finding justice and peace. He would always endure. Captivity in Vietnam. Being captured by North Vietnamese forces during the Vietnam War was one of the most harrowing experiences an American soldier could face. Without a formal declaration of war, these prisoners were seen not as fellow combatants but as foreign invaders, an idea that allowed the captors to justify extreme brutality. The treatment of POWs was not just about punishment. It was a deliberate tactic to break both the body and the spirit of those captured. Take, for example, the story of John McCain, a name many now associate with resilience and honor. After surviving a plane crash in 1967, McCain was captured by the Vietcong and endured 5 long years as a prisoner. His time in captivity was marked by unimaginable suffering. Initially, McCain was treated by Vietnamese doctors whose crude procedures caused severe nerve damage to his leg. This was just the beginning. As time wore on, McCain was subjected to a relentless schedule of torture. Physical punishments administered every 2 hours for days on end. During one brutal episode, the beatings were so severe that his left arm was broken and multiple ribs were fractured. These injuries were not only painful, but left lasting scars that affected him for the rest of his life. McCain's ordeal was far from unique. Many American soldiers captured by North Vietnamese forces faced similar fates. The captors used a range of horrific methods designed to extract military information and force confessions of alleged war crimes. Prisoners were tied up with arms or legs bound by ropes until joints were dislocated. Others had their feet shackled in heavy iron restraints for weeks on end, leaving them in excruciating pain and with little hope of recovery. Extreme beatings were common, often pushing a prisoner's body past its breaking point. In many cases, the physical abuse was so severe that it led directly to death. But the brutality was not only physical, it had a deep psychological impact as well. The constant fear of further torture, combined with the uncertainty of what the future might hold, left many soldiers with long-lasting emotional scars. The atmosphere in these prisoner camps was one of constant despair, where the captor's main goal was to crush any will to resist. This relentless psychological warfare was meant to create a sense of hopelessness, making the prisoners believe that their fate was sealed. The treatment of POWs also had significant repercussions back home in the United States. News of the harsh conditions and torture methods used by North Vietnamese forces stirred strong emotions among the American public. For many, the images and stories coming out of the prisoner camps shattered the belief that the war was being fought honorably. The public began to question not only the strategy of the war, but also the moral implications of a conflict where soldiers were treated in such a brutal manner. John McCain's personal story, while painful, became a powerful symbol of resilience. Despite the suffering he endured, he emerged from captivity determined to serve his country and to advocate for change. His experiences shed light on the harsh realities of the Vietnam War, influencing both military policies and public opinion in the United States. McCain's later political career was marked by his willingness to speak openly about the sacrifices he and so many others had made, serving as a reminder of the human cost of war. Mind games in the jungle. Psychological warfare was at the heart of the Vietnam conflict. American forces fought not only a tangible enemy, but also an invisible one that gnawed at the minds of soldiers every day. The Vietcong, with their elusive and unpredictable nature, turned each day in the field into a battle against the unknown. Blending in with civilians and hiding behind familiar faces, the enemy became a constant source of fear and paranoia. The Vietcong understood that the mind could be as vulnerable as the body. They didn't just set traps with punji stakes or wire snares, they also fought a war of ideas and symbols. Propaganda played a huge role in their strategy. Guerrillas distributed eye-catching posters featuring national symbols like the lotus flower. These images were mixed with pictures of destroyed American planes and portraits of Ho Chi Minh. Spreading these vibrant posters in key areas, they blurred the lines between friend and foe, making it almost impossible for U.S. soldiers to tell who was a civilian and who might be a Viet Cong fighter. This tactic of blending in created a constant sense of danger. Every shadow, every unexpected movement in the dense jungle could signal a hidden ambush. For American troops, the fear was twofold. They had to worry about facing a clear enemy, and also about the possibility that an innocent face might conceal a deadly enemy. This perpetual uncertainty took a heavy toll on morale and made it hard for soldiers to trust not just the enemy, but sometimes even each other. The fear of being captured by the Viet Cong added another layer of stress. Soldiers lived with the constant worry that one misstep could lead to capture and torture, leaving them in a state of constant alert and emotional fatigue. Stories of soldiers breaking under pressure or losing their sanity due to endless stress were not uncommon. The inability to distinguish between friendly locals and enemy fighters created an atmosphere where every step felt dangerous and every sound might signal an ambush. Famous stories like that of John McCain remind us how these psychological tactics left deep scars. The stress, the tension, and the ever-present danger of the jungle environment all contributed to a level of trauma that affected soldiers long after the fighting stopped. The Viet Cong's brilliant use of psychological warfare not only disrupted military operations, but also challenged the very spirit of American resolve. These experiences changed the way the war was fought and how it was viewed back home. The relentless pressure and the constant fear of ambush forced military leaders to rethink their strategies, and they left a lasting impact on U.S. military policies. The lessons learned in Vietnam about the power of psychological warfare continue to influence military thinking today. What do you think is the most important lesson we can learn about the human cost of conflict? Let us know your opinion in the comments below.